Good afternoon, everybody. I'm truly honored to introduce our Grand Round speaker for today, Dr. Les Folio. Dr. Folio is a senior member in the Moffitt Cancer Center Department of Diagnostic Imaging and Interventional Radiology. He's also a senior member of the Machine Learning Department and a professor of oncologic services at the University of South Florida. And he has recently, I believe, become the acting associate CMIO. Is that correct? Last week. So that's great. Dr. Folio has a very interesting pathway, and it was really a privilege to hear about it last night over dinner. And he has a background in aerospace medicine, as well as being a radiology technologist at one point in his life. He's been a flight surgeon as well, an NIH researcher, and has brought imaging to the battlefield. So I really think that, this is a very interesting history, and I've been so thankful to be able to have some time with you over the last couple of days. You're very prolific in the world of imaging informatics, and so I'm really pleased to hand the stage over to you. So please welcome Dr. Folio.
Thanks, Melissa. Can you hear me okay? Take that easy, yes. And yeah, I've been fascinated with what I've seen so far too, and the discussions that we've had so far. I'll be showing you some things that you already have, at least in experimental form, if I have that right, with the interactive multimedia reporting. And I do have a few disclosures. Some of this is not current. The Philips agreement is going to end, but we still do it in a 2-year buffer period. So the packs that I'll be showing you here is Carestream, and was Philips had recently acquired them, and Algatech. And none of I might show this one patent, but it's probably not going to end up being a patent on an electronic health record. It's also interactive. And these are some of my boards and committees, a couple of them. I won't get into detail, but just so you know about these, and the co-chair of the CPHIMS Enterprise Imaging Work Group, I'm no longer part of, but I'll just mention that for the next 2 years of my presentations from the letter of the law. But I'll show a couple of the white papers we've published based on standards that we would like to kind of pave the way towards, that are more open source, to allow these capabilities to cross vendors. So things that I'll show you. So hopefully by the end of this, you will understand the value of interactive multimedia reporting. I'll just call it interactive reporting, or IMR is what we called it in the white papers. The multimedia component is the fact that the hyperlinks within your reports can take you directly to the images, which I saw as possible today, again, in an experimental form in Visage. I'll also show some work, some published, some not published, but potentially pretty exciting. We have the study designs from when I was at NIH helping create this capability, things like click-through rates and adoption of radiologists of the technology. Which I believe, and also UVA, when they were developing this shortly after us, also felt that the fact that people were using it meant that it was efficient, because otherwise radiologists won't use things that aren't. I'll also talk about future directions of leveraging this interconnectivity of the labels that we're creating on a daily basis, thousands. And you're starting probably to do it here. I'm not sure how that connection is, but some of the stuff you're doing with AI Doc, I believe it was, I saw, is doing some of the stuff I said was going to be in the future, but apparently it's now. So good. I'm glad the future's catching up. And my aerospace medicine days, this is me when I was a little bit younger, many years ago. But I like this analogy when I was flying in F-16s, like a Wizzo type of thing, a navigator. Flight surgeon's not the primary pilot in these, but with the head-up display, and some cars have this now, but this is a little more sophisticated. It's been around for 40 years, and a lot of this was classified. But thanks to some declassification of this ability, if you look here really closely, the screen should be good enough to see what we call bandit there, and that's usually the F-16, and this is taken from an F-15 that then is trying to approach that in 3-dimensional space. Not too unlike how we do with target lesions in cancer. Although when I retired from the military and started at NIH, my boss said, Les, you're probably not going to be doing that kind of target lesions here. They're going to be cancer lesions. And this is melanoma, which I took an interest in because of the way it reminded me of how we tracked blast fragments with CPS, which we published in the military as Cartesian positioning system to allow the registration to be driven anatomically and automatically, which you have in paraplanar mode when you're looking at prior exams, lines everything up, but also the mini-CAD. So we did this shortly after I got to NIH with Dr. Stephen Rosenberg's melanoma patients. He said, yeah, let's take a look and see how it does. And one click of a lung nodule would do a segmentation. And this is about 15 years ago, stretching across a liver lesion here. I like the melanoma distribution because it was a little bit more challenging to try to find. And then we created the ability to then have a single button, which they called follow-up tool, but the initials were FOOT. So we changed it to lesion management, or I can't remember the tool, but with one button, now we're looking at the current exam. This was the prior exam. And the fact that all these segmentations are there, or measurements, they could be two diameter measurements for like lymph nodes and cancer trials. With one button, you click this and you not only have the registration, but it then applies a mini-CAD to then go and find everything fully automatically. Now that looks all great, but because it didn't work 100% of the time, and I don't know of a segmentation program that works 100% of the time. We were experimenting with HealthMine at Moffitt Cancer Center, and that was pretty good. It was the best segmentation engine I'd seen. But now we're going to get Flywheel, and hopefully we can build some kind of segmentation tools. But the neat thing too is, as you did this, it would track the lesions mathematically in the background. Not that hard. Comma separated value. You have the tables. I'll show you some of that. You could also graph it. And the oncologists like that, but it was really more about the numbers. So I've always been an innovator. I just threw the slide in based on some conversations we had yesterday. So I remember doing this, and as soon as I show up at NIH, they're like, you're handwriting down all these measurements that we're doing that are all digital to begin with. Okay, I can get used to that. Now, and this is me in an aircraft carrier. I spent some time with the Navy and the Coast Guard too, even though I was Air Force. And I'm in a flight suit because I was primarily a flight surgeon and a radiologist. But and this is Cybernaut. This is about 15, maybe 10 years before Google Glass and these kind of things. We're using it to see if we could do medical triage, these kind of things. Now, it didn't work in the aircraft carrier because Wi-Fi doesn't get past metal scuttles and all that. But here I was going back to the days when I recall my mom. I would ask my mom, why is that guy or girl out there recording this electricity on a piece of paper? I mean, this is 50 years ago, I guess, but we were still doing that. This is all automated in America, not in Germany. They still write it down because, you know, they don't want Big Brother watching your electricity. But then I said, David Blumke and I said, well, let's see, since the segmentations aren't 100%, but we're going to get this capability at the hyperlink capability that a few vendors now have. Visage is really getting into this space, and I think most will. We're trying to open up these standards again. We then pulled, I sent the survey to 250 or so of our oncologists. A lot of them we didn't even know of, but 100 that were most current on referring patients to us in the clinical center at NIH responded. And we asked a few questions. Are our reports adequate for oncology assessment? Is a loaded question because we knew going in that they weren't. Even the radiologist said, we don't agree that our reports are satisfying them because the core lab is doing that, right? So we mostly disagreed that our reports were adequate. And again, we knew this going in, but we wanted to show that we need to do better and build a core lab. And then we said, well, we're not doing a good job because partially we don't even know which patients have cancer, which ones, and what are the top 40. We found the top 40 cancers. It kind of sounds like a hit song list, right? And I said, let's do some pick down lists and be able to say, okay, cancer, yes, no, cancer, this type, and then we can go from there. But instead, I couldn't even build into our, it was all scripts at the time, a perfectly good electronic health record that it's not about the health record, but even At Moffitt, we get this a lot. Some of our most common histories are, I believe it says for follow-up, but maybe they were trying to tell me something on my ideas of having pick lists, but these were the most common histories that we got. And I think it's not too uncommon. So since I did enough public embarrassment in the article, we did want to see where do we need to go to help the oncologists to find the lesions. And many of them agreed the tables and graphs were good. They were separate questions there. The reports with the hyperlink text was a select down menu. So after I'd showed them what that's going to bring them in a audience with a retreat of oncologists, they said, "Oh, you know, if you can do that, we want that, and I'll show you what that is." So we had showed them the capability that we were building at the time. This is back in 2014 or so, after we had the segmentation stuff. Okay, segmentation is not 100%, so that's not really helping them, although we did in certain instances. But here's a prior NIH report. They don't do it this way anymore. The reports, instead of having to hunt for them, the oncologist would come down and you'd spend a lot of time hunting for the measurement. Where is it in the body of imaging that we have to look at a few thousand images to find? But to have them as hyperlinks that not only stood out because you can see them, but because your generation is growing up with the fact that you should be able to take anything from a website or a report, be able to click on that lesion and take you to that lesion. And you have this now, not everyone. I think just a certain percentage of folks are experimenting with this here, but you should see it soon, where you click on that particular lesion, it takes you to the hyperlink will take you to that actual lesion in the volume set. So it takes you to that slice. And then from there, you can say, okay, now let's look at the lesion. Let's look at the surrounding. Do we still agree on the measurement? And in the background, and I believe you're going to have this too, whether or not it's the graphs. The graphs didn't turn out to be as useful as they appear, if that makes sense. They didn't always track everything perfectly. I'm showing you a perfect one here. It was more the tables that we could use and the background of what is in the data. And so the graphs were a nice, you know, these are the 4 target lesions here, is how your patient's responding. The patients like this, of course, because they can see that their cancer is decreasing in this particular case. They all weren't that fortunate. And now what about the radiologist? So we're doing this, but how easy is it going to be for us? And we turned it on overnight and we started, I started, then someone else started, and then it just kept going. But here's me saying, okay, unchanged lung nodules, for example, right upper lobe. I actually don't hold a microphone, it's all hands-free. So I say that, then I would go to measure it. At least for the last, for the last 4 years, I wasn't doing any measurements. We had radiology preprocessors that would go in and measure the lesions for us, and I'll show you how we did that workflow. And a lot of folks are doing it this way. So, but anyway, the measurement's there. I accept this measurement, whether it's an AI measurement or myself. I went back to measuring everything myself now at Moffitt, and I was making mistakes because I hadn't sent a measurement in 8 years because they would all just automatically import. So here I would say hyperlink. And what it did is then brought these 4, maybe more data elements into my report, and I didn't have to say them. So I had a handshake after that measurement was made, or after I hit the B for the next bookmark. That was just our shortcut. It could be whatever you want. I would say this is the active hyperlink. I say the word hyperlink. I thought it was a little crazy at first, but I got used to it. And as long as I don't have to cross-check these numbers, that is a real time saver right there. And again, when I stopped having this after having it for 8 years, it was painful to go back and dictate numbers. So once you start this, I think you would never stop. And here, it's not just these numbers, but there's other metadata in the background, the XYZ location of where you've made this measurement. This is essentially a label for machine learning. So keep that in mind. This is very powerful, more than the convenience that what I'm showing you. And the bookmark tables, this was the most useful thing I found, is we could go in and someone, a preprocessor or an oncologist, they're still doing it this way. They still leverage the bookmark tables. You see which ones are in a lymph node. You can get all the recess diameters. You can make these tables how you want. We came up with a standard way to do it so we could always go and look. It didn't mean that the radiologist had to go in and do this every time. I did it because it was a hobby. It was my work with the vendor to build this kind of capability. But that's very powerful. Now, as far as it was easy for us to dictate, residents that would rotate from the military, Walter Reed, to NIH. They would learn this their first day. And they actually spent more time getting through security and government and that kind of stuff to get their stuff, even though they're military, it's right across the street. You had to do all that. But they started to learn the dictation system. It was their own, it wasn't PowerScribe, it was some other thing with Dragon Speak in the background. It was a native reporting that CareStream had if you had that particular package. A lot of folks didn't get that package because, well, they didn't have a research agreement, so it wasn't free to them. But we wanted to see if radiologists were going to use this, and the residents would pick it up first day, and because it's easier, and they said that's cool, and they would just start using it. That was not a showstopper. So by the afternoon, they were using these. But you can see when we started this in February 2015, we had bookmarks before that, because bookmarks are things that we elect measurements and arrows to be. In this particular vendor and a lot of vendors, the bookmark is something you elect to be a bookmark, whether it's a measurement, an arrow, an oval. But we elected all the measurements to be bookmarks, and we started that just prior to this. So bookmarks always outweigh the hyperlinks. There's always more of those. Then we looked at, so CT went up to about 70%. I think that's what they're still at right now when I call back. MR wasn't as much because we didn't do a lot of the clinical trials in MR. The PET CT, all the SUVs and things they were taking was useful. And this reflects what UVA was doing too. And they also had these dips. And I can tell you, his name's Mark. When Mark wasn't there for RSNA or something else, this, in fact, you can see RSNA in some of these things, or March vacations. When Mark wasn't there, he was the champion, then it went down. And at UVA, they had something similar. When the residency director or the teacher wasn't there, it dipped. That's just the way it was, but it still generally went up. And what I think's, oh, I used the mouse, it's backwards for me, but I'll use this. UVA published theirs. And so after they started about a year or so later than us, they had their training in here, and Krieg, Askins and Beasley said, once we trained the radiologist, it took off. Why I'm showing you this is I think this is more valuable than statistics and other kinds of complicated tests, because again, radiologists won't do things if it takes them time. So when you start to do something, wow, this works, or like the G502, which I believe you're all using, the mouse. Once we started that at Moffitt, it was shortly after I got, is that what you use, G502? Oh, soon. Okay, so at a theater near you, you might get the G502 or maybe 602. I don't know, I heard that was a little bit better, but maybe I have a slide on that. But yeah, I swear by the G502. I use two of them myself. Then another thing we built into it, because we had this research agreement, we said, now that we have that, we want this. We want the prior date to have a link, because it was automatically imported along with everything else you'd want, except for the measurements, because they, even though the RP would measure, they didn't jump right into our report right away. We had to approve them before we did that. The same like you would do with AI. You want to see the measurement before it goes in your words. So radiology preprocessors didn't touch our reports. So we would look at them and say, oh, okay, this lung nodule, okay, it's not that big, but it counts as a target lesion since the RECIST 1.1. Do you learn about that in school, in residency, RECIST, the clinical trials, a little bit? Not very exciting. RECIST, when I would give talks at Walter Reeder, we didn't teach it at AFIP, but I had a talk called RECIST, and the title is RECIST with the right spelling, and then not RECIST, which is what radiologists do when someone comes down the hall and they said, I've got a RECIST case. So the radiologist will RECIST because they know that's going to be 45 minutes. I mean, it's longer than your whole dictation. But then we said, well, we want to be able to look and click on that link, have the prior report instantly. And you have this anyway with other things next to the prior exam, but it was just handy. It was right there. And we were fairly structured about level 4. We weren't quite synoptic in that. We try to be synoptic at Moffitt with some of them, like level 6, like BIRADS and LIRADS, that kind of stuff. But in these kind of organized reports, generally it's from the top down, which I think most reports are. So some structure, level 3 or 4, and then you go to the same lesion, say, okay, here's a lesion, 1/10 of a centimeter bigger. Well, that's not that much, but remember, these are clinical trials, right? So if that is the one that throws them over the edge to the next level, progressive disease, then that's not a good thing. So knowing these to the 1/10 of a centimeter, no more than that, figures out in the calculation. You can go to the bookmark table, you can see the labels. Again, this wasn't for the radiologist to do. I did, and a few of us did because we were working with the teams to help them quantify. And everything I've showed you up to this point is in our article we did for radiographics back in 2018 is when we published it. So this I can make available to you in a full text form for educational purposes. So let's take a look at this from a clinical trial perspective. And at Moffitt, we put we do the target lesions. We don't have the hyperlink capability with the packs that we have there, but we will put target lesions into our reports because that's what these clinical trials, the oncologists want to know. And there's a payback system too. And we didn't have that payback system in NIH. So this number right here with these two lesions. So here's the overall sum. So it's really this number that matters. These are two lesions in a patient that after the treatment started, they were already decreased almost to the point where they would meet the partial response. So just as a reminder, if you haven't had this in a while, these are the 4 categories for RECIST 1.1. It's similar for most of your criteria. They're basically 4 categories. You either are cured of cancer, it's no longer in your body, or you're progressive disease and you're no longer in the trial and good luck. Or a lot of times NIH, we would get them when they were progressive disease. But anyway, this patient is a partial responder and that's good, right? So it's not a cure, but and I've done this myself in the past. I still do it. I look at the prior exam. If I don't know the history, I look at the prior. I understand in Visage, you can bring up 10 different priors if you wanted to and have it all laid out. That's a monumental capability. We can't quite do that. I can bring up 1 prior exam. I can bring up 2. NIH, we could bring up 11 max, I think. But let's keep this in mind. Radiologists might say stable metastatic disease, except we try not to use that word at NIH. We try not to use it at Moffitt. Because if you don't know what trial it is, if you're not doing the math yourself, be careful with that word because the patient may perceive it differently. And at NIH, the patient would email us directly and say, you said I'm stable, but I'm not stable because stable means the therapy is not working. Partial response is better than stable. All right, semantics, but just something to think about in your reporting. What we've used is unchanged. When I first got to NIH, I'm like, unchanged. You know, that just sounds funny to me, but it's a common term used now. I think, how many used unchanged? Just, so it's common. All right, and I see it in other radiologist reports, but I don't use the word stable, me personally. It's not like a hard and fast thing, but just to keep in mind. Then we wanted to see, okay, so radiologists are adopting this, so they like it. Now, do they like it enough to go in and click ourselves? And are our clinicians clicking these links when they see them? So we went all the way back to the medical record. And we weren't looking for click-through rates, the same reasons that Amazon and Google do for, you know, those who like this tumor might like this tumor or might like this pleural fusion. It's not for purchasing or anything like that. It's just for us to see. And this isn't rocket science here. This is just us clicking at least once for every exam that we're reading. Let me try to explain it better. And I know that some of these are mine. So we started the bookmark capability and the ability to click way back into 2015. So on an exam in December of 2017, a lot of us were clicking at least one report and one link within that report, not just the link in our report to take us to the prior report, but a link within that report to see what were they talking about. We used it a lot. For at least every exam, we did more than one, sometimes 2 or 3. I know I would do 5 and I would go back to the baseline and see what did that lesion look like at the baseline? Are we still following the same one? There's been quite a few times where the lesion changes location. It just happens that you're not following the exact same index or target lesion. And this allows you to see that's the lesion we've been following this whole time. If it hasn't happened to you, I hope it doesn't happen to you, but you can watch and maybe it'll happen to someone else, right? It doesn't happen to you. It happens to my friend. No, it's just hard to do. Clinical trials are hard to keep track of. In fact, each of these measurements a lot of times are seen up to 8 times more by your, what is it, Sophie, the CROs, the people who are doing this for a living. They're going back and they're radiologists out there and the pharma hired by Merck, for example, and these radiologists are looking at all of our measurements and they'll have adjudication and it's like it's a lot of excitement if you like measurements like I do. I don't like them that much, but I do like them. I mean, I'm the annotation guy. So in all scripts, it would be a way to click, and you've got this in Epic in a much more elegant way to be able to click through, open up the exam, and then within the exam, see the hyperlinks. And you say, well, I know that in this report, everything else is going to be pretty much normal, or, you know, whatever he just describes with the steatosis or these other things they're not interested in, they want to know, but it's the lesions. So they go in, and this is the zero footprint viewer, or the rad light. We have GE zero footprint viewer at Moffitt. You have a zero footprint viewer. Everyone has a light version of this that your clinicians are going to. And they can say, well, all right, well, let's go ahead and click on this. Takes me to the lesion. Very handy. I mean, this is like Clark's third law of technological advances. I forget the first two, but the third one is my favorite. And that's that any technologically advanced capability that is significantly advanced is indistinguishable from magic. And when I first showed this to the oncologist, they said, we're going to have that. We want it. We want it now. And why wouldn't you, right? You're growing up in a world where you're expecting links to take you to things like this. So that's an everyday thing. Seth Berkowitz up at Beth Israel, I just emailed him. I said, what packs are you doing? He built the capability to change healthcare for their packs. And he built this capability. And in Visage, I know Karen Mader was on some of the papers we've done before, but also Irene and others. So we're hoping that every vendor is going to have this in a readily available form. In this particular patient, they could go to the chart if it was charted. If they were target lesions, you have to say that they're targets, and be able to see that these are relatively unchanged, right? Not stable, because we don't know the calculation on this particular one. So then we looked at our 27 institutes plus some. We were the clinical center, the biggest institute of NIH, but we had all the patients, mostly from NCI. And it made sense that they are 30% of our users. They're 30% of our clickers. I went to surgery and nursing and some of these other folks. I said, how come you aren't clicking on our links? And they said, well, we're not reading your reports. We're having them read. And then when they come back, and there are other people here in nursing or whatever that are reading the reports and then getting to them and saying the target lesions are bigger, smaller, same, you know, nothing's changed type. So we found out that some of our users that had their names on the reports aren't reading the reports. I know you might find that surprising, but and I'm not trying to say anything bad about anyone, but a lot of times the name on the report, I don't know if you've had that kind of situation, you call the name of the person who ordered it, I don't know the patient, you know, that type of thing. I think it just happens. Happened in military too, mostly because we would deploy every 6 months. But I'm going to show you a little circle here. And it relates to something I saw today too, with AI doc. And this is RP. So radiology preprocessor is what we called these folks that were postdocs or folks that came to NIH to, you know, I've got a month to work with you. What can I do? I said, well, you can take this little course we have. It's online. It's still online if you're interested. In fact, Yale did something like this too with emergency room scribes, where they would scribe the information, I believe for radiologists to get the clinical information to the ER docs. So our scribes were folks that would go in, open the exam, pre-measure the target lesions because they saw which ones the target lesions were. They go to the bookmark table, something we don't want to do as radiologists. We don't want to measure them either. You know, my hand would wear out after 300 measurements in a day, hence the G502. I don't have any financial interest in Logitech, by the way, but you got to save your hands. And so I didn't measure. I went from 300 measurements down to 5 a day or something. Which I don't mind. And that's the way AI is going to go, right? It's all going to be identified. You get the workless triage. That's where we want to go with this. I do personally. So then we would review it and say, okay, and they were hyperlinks. They were bookmarks. Then we elected to take the ones that we agreed from the RP that took from the automation to say, take me to this level, not to segment it, but to say, this is the level of that lesion. And the mini registration would take you to that lesion area and put a crosshair. So that's the lesion you want to measure. And it was pretty simple for them to say, I'm going to remeasure that lesion. And 90% of the time, after 2 weeks of training, we could get anyone up to 90%, which is pretty good for most of your AI type of things. So then we would review the report at the end of the shift. The radiology preprocessor would go in and they would grade themselves. on an Excel spreadsheet. It went to a leaderboard so they could compare each other. So it's like gamification. We actually published a paper with Mass General on that for radiology training and annotations and segmentations, and how often are radiologists getting the correct lesion, or radiology trainees. And so in another part of the circle now is the triage, which you have, I believe, right? So if there's a pneumothorax in the list or something else, or an intracranial bleed, AI Doc and several other vendors are there. Zebra, they've been doing this for a few years, but now I think it's pretty well accepted in practice, where you go to the list and you have a certain couple flags and the A shows up. I want to read that case next, might have something critical on it. So that's what the RPs would do. I gave them a presentation on looking for pneumothorax, looking for PE, looking for the things that are critical. And so again, 90% of the time they would get that. And there was a case after this one spear was a high school student. Actually, one high school student would qualify to come to NIH and do this. And she learned in 1 week and saw tension pneumothorax in a patient that I would not have seen until 18 hours later. We would be 18 to 24 hours behind because we're just always short on radiologists. We were never a day behind. We were just, the night person was just having a field day. So we would review those sooner, get the findings to the provider 18 hours earlier. It was actually, I think, 90 minutes earlier on average. So this is just your general work list triage, which I think will be in every system soon. I mean, I don't see why someone would not want that. Or a person doing it, human in the loop. And there was a paper out of British Columbia too that would do this. Now think about this with what AI is doing. So when you give the feedback, now I don't know where it stands, but when you see that A and it comes up and you agree 90% of the time, if I'm close on that, you say, I agree, that was pneumothorax. You're training your system theoretically. I don't know what's happening in the background with that, but let's take a look. So the human in the loop, we published our first year of experience with this, Michael Doe, and that's Lillian, all these folks. James Gully is the GU lead at NCI, and Hadi Bagheri now with the FDA. And we published our experience showing that our target lesion concordance was much better than not having the RPs or not having in the future an automation. But this is not AI. It's a potential model for that to improve the workflow, to improve the target lesions. We weren't doing it like we do at Moffitt, where we physically go back and it takes about a half hour. And that's a half hour you don't have to go and see which are the target lesions, which do I measure? And you probably don't have to do that in your workflow. You've got Gordon Harris up at the Harvard hospitals doing that. He and I have taught this course on core labs and how to do these types of things. He's got a very robust system. But we improved our target lesion concordance, earlier notifications, about 90 minutes faster than we could have because it's within the hour. And it cut our time in half. It says 30% here, but that was the 37% was the first year. But after I did this for 4 years and others, it doubled our efficiency essentially. So pre-measuring is a good thing. Here with some of the folks we had in the core lab. Laura's going to go to University of Penn, Hadi's with the FDA. So I'd walk in the room, they'd be like, "Oh, you think there's a lesion?" When I walk in, they'd be all serious, right? Yeah, no, just kidding. But Alex started when she was in high school, hired by NCI to do this. And then as I took over the core lab, it grew a little bit, and people are having fun doing this. And plus, the leaderboard gives you incentive. You know, I'm doing better and so, and you only knew, like a video game, who you were, right? So then we're dealing with labeled lesions. So keep that in mind. So each one of these lesions are tied directly to our words within the sentence, within that period. Now, if you have a run-on sentence, that's fine too. Put a little NLP on that. But these are essentially about as high of a quality label I can think of. And so Summers and myself and Stanford, Lundgren and Willamette had this one up, and we give courses on this too, on centralized versus, the federated learning. And I'm not sure how your AI doc is learning these things, but it's probably learning in its own system. You have a business associate agreement with that company to say that they can look at your data. What they do with the data is one thing, what they do with the PHI is another, but a federated model would allow this to learn in the workflow. And then I'll get into, if there's time, how how we would be able to do this in a fashion where, just like the RP is looking, how did I do on my measurements? How did the AI do? So training in the workflow, which will keep the AI getting smarter by supervised learning. So when we had a few years of this under our belt, Ron Summers and team then published this with 32,000 of these lesions to be available in their XYZ locations. So each one of these had their location, and these are bounding boxes, as you can see, to go around what we had marked. And we did 2 diameter measurements. The 2 diameter would do better. Plus you have a better chance of getting the short axis correct if you draw the long axis first. So most of these were from the two line measurements. And then these were all then put into a map. This is kind of like a heat map, but these are the locations of all these lesions in a frontal projection of these thousands of patients that had these lesions. And we went through a year of just making it so these lesions and images could be available, because you have to look at each image because you might have pixel data in there in addition to the DICOM. So that's why NIH has this rule about the PHI, and we're working on something with that at Moffitt with the machine learning to get out to find pixel data. But that could be pretty valuable. This is just one snapshot, but there's an example of what could be done with these labeled lesions from a machine learning perspective. Now, this is a whole nother thing we're still working on with Dr. Apollo and James Gully and Bill Dayhut under the GU section. This is a bladder cancer cohort. So this is unrelated to that cohort. I just wanted to superimpose to show that this is a coronal heat map of all segmented lesions in bladder cancer. So Dr. Apollo would hire a postdoc, a lot of times a high school or college student, to go in and segment all these things, because we don't want to do it. Radiology residents, even med students get a little bored of this after a while. But a couple of these were med students, some foreign trained, but we took all thousands of these lesions and put them into a heat map. We separated them out into male and female. We wanted to look at the distribution. This could be useful for a priori, where are lesions more seen in bladder cancer, and male versus female. And we put these into skin masks. Still haven't published this. We presented at ARS years ago. But some of this makes sense too, as to where we see metastatic lymphadenopathy, for example. Makes sense that it's on the left side. It's the aorta, it's the anatomy. The same in the mediastinum, more on the right side, the superior vena cava. So it's just potentially useful, but we're still trying to figure out how to publish that one. Here's a label, here's a circle. I won't go over into detail, but this is when the FDA said that your AI can improve in the workflow. That's what allows you to click that button. So it took a few years before they came out with that white paper. But once they did this, then FDA said you can have the AI continue to learn based on you saying that that was the right lesion, or if you don't accept it. So that way the machine learning is guided, supervised learning, and that could be monumental to get to where I would like to see us get to, is now that all these lesions are, you could potentially have them all automatically identified, as I showed earlier on. So here's a lesion, right upper lobe, and what would I say to that? I can put in my own macros to tie into the dictation engine that's in the upper lobe. So I want that to then state this. It's not rocket science. It's not elaborate text. It's either in the hilum or it's in the lung. We did have an issue with HealthMine where they would confuse hilum and the lung. And that would mean that they would take the wrong measurement. But then we trained it to say, if it's in the hilum, give us the chance, because it had trouble differentiating these areas. Like this one, for example, is it a mass or not? And sometimes it takes a few radiologists over time. But imagine this being able to come out. And then as these areas are identified, the rest of the report, it's up to us as radiologists, of course, read this. And before we sign off on it, we're still doing the same thing. We're still reviewing all the images. What you have to be careful in this is to make sure you prompt the AI or the person that's making these measurements to say, these are the lesions, and not being fed this information before you interpret it. So that brings up a lot of questions. And the last thing I want to show here, and I want to have some time for questions, is to talk about these white papers. Myself and Chris Roth out of Duke, with HIMS and SIM, David Kwan out of Cancer Care, Ontario, to say that we want to make all this capable for other types of users, all vendors. So our job was to get this international group together, which Karen Maynard and other vendors were on, some folks that you know here, and to do this in not just radiology, but pathology, ophthalmology. We've got a current working group now with dental and ocular to have this type of interactivity, annotations, and it's all going to be good for the machine learning perspective. I'm just going to, I'm sharing. Okay. Can I escape from the show? Yeah. And I was just going to jump to something here. Apple goes the opposite direction. I just wanted to show this. Angel's not here, but I think he'd be proud of me. I did this. So this is a photogram which we just saw, and I can't remember his name. Zenas, yeah. And he was all excited about this too, photogrammetry. When my son showed me this, he took a photogram of me and you can rotate it around. You can do it on your phones. It's kind of like your measuring app and this type of thing. And I learned that it wasn't registration in his office today, but it's more of stitching all the photographs. But this is my medical record, and this is what we have a patent on, where if I were to click, say in the shoulder, and this would be a patient health record, essentially interactive. That's my shoulder. I was in ski patrol, so I hurt myself quite a bit. I've got the Hill Sachs and the bank heart lesion. And then if someone were to say, I go to a doc and they say, well, let's see what's up in your ankle here. And so it's a pictorial driven type of electronic health record, not tied in with Epic or anyone else, but just fire HTML5, FHIR. It's kind of a new, not standard, but a open source type of approach that works with DICOM to get all these images. But if someone saw this in my ankle and they saw that and they didn't realize I was in ski patrol, didn't have the history, they'd say, well, maybe this is osseous metastatic disease. And so, no, I did Nordic ski patrol in Switzerland. A lot of us had this osteochondritis dissecans in our talus, and I walk perfectly fine. So anyway, I'm a good example of a health record because I'm healthy, but I've had a lot of damage done by carrying people down mountains and glacier and avalanche and mountaineering and military. So I think you now understand the interactivity of a report and having a hyperlink and taking you to an image. It's just a wonderful thing to have, and you will have it. I think everyone will eventually. Going over adoption rates and click-through rates, I think shows that people like it. We like it as radiologists. Our clinicians like it. NCI. I think it speaks for itself. And in the future, what I thought was the future, but I think I saw some of it today, where you say to the AI doc, I agree that this was a pneumothorax, or feed back that information. You know, there's a radiologist in the workflow. We flagged something to you. Do you think we were right? And it wants to know if it's right. Now, whether or not it's doing something with Google or Amazon, I don't know, but they'll do with the data what they want for their AI engine. I'm sure it's all about board. So that's all I have. Thank you. I have other things to talk about, but I wanted to, did I speak to those hyperlinks well enough?
I don't think that everybody's seen the hyperlinks. I know we've shown it to some of the residents on who have either been in the reading room with either me or Stefan or Chris. But we'll send out some messaging around that before soon so that you guys can see.
You've had it for a long time, right? 2 days?
Like a week. Jamal asked, can hyperlinks work in exported reports and images?
That's the ultimate question. I have a slide on that. I have a slide showing, I feel like, oh, that's me in my combat mode. Well, it'll remind me what the question is. In fact, I don't even remember who this guy was back here, but they said you just want him to go with you in that helicopter to Baghdad. Oh, here's the two scrolling mouses. I swear I have this. It's a mic stand. Oh, there you go. 502. How we program ours. Yeah, let me just get to the, because I don't remember where the slide is. No, they can't be exported into report. At least I have not succeeded in that. When we would get reports from UVA using even the same vendor, the hyperlink, and you want it this way for now. The hyperlink would not work because it's a secure thing to that patient's data in another center. So when it gets exported, similar to some of the links you may put into your reports, it'll look like a link or it might have an address. Let's say if it's an address to a public site, like what we saw this morning with a thoracic deflectioner criteria or something like this, or ACR recommendations for lung rads, whatever. Even that won't be a link because there's a security issue with those. In fact, that's what took us longest, I think, in doing the hyperlink, is where that thing is going to take you. And it's got to be within your own system. And that just makes sense. Did I answer your question, Jamal? They're here. And it's a great question. And oh, more questions.
Just some of this might be attendance stuff, but I just want to check. Are there any?
Yes, thanks. Oh, thanks. I'm sorry. You're right there. And
anybody look at the difference this would make to medical legal liability?
I don't know. I know that we didn't look into that at all.
Presumably you're more safer.
I would think so.
More robust, not missing things.
I would think so, because it gives you that handshake that's the lesion I'm talking about. There's been occasion where you might have hit the B, or you might have another active lesion you're not looking at, just like you could have the wrong patient or that kind of thing. But that would be rare, because if you would say hyperlink, it'll jump to that lesion. It's like, whoa, you just went to the pelvis. So I think it would be safer, but that is an interesting question. I can't think of a negative to that, except if a link were to take somebody to a site that, but I don't see how that would happen, because links are so specific.
And my other question is, does the multimedia report system necessitate more storage?
Again, I don't know. It didn't seem to slow anything down. I'm still in touch with Greg Cohen. He's our SIP back in NIH, and I'm in touch with him all the time. I can actually just text him now and say, did these require any more storage? And I would think there might be space savings by, I'm kind of.
It's just linking.
It's linking to within the system of where the images are that the PACS is gathering, because it's also, because it doesn't, I don't even think they go to our VNA. And yeah, these are great questions. It'd be greater if I knew the answer, but that's what makes them great, is we don't. But on the hyponym reporting, anyone doing that here? Hyponym reporting? No. Do you want me to? Who was it last night? Joe. Joe. What's Joe's last name? So Joe Cavalis is doing the hyponym reporting. Do you want to see what it's about? Because I think there's a future to this. One of our residents presented this. Most people don't. So this has been out since 2012. PowerScribe 360 has this. PowerScribe 1 is going to call it ambient mode, and ambient mode will be this findings mode. And this is what I've been doing for last year. It uses hypernyms like lung and daughter hyponyms, which would be chest, lung, or lung or lobe, particular thing, any words that you would want to use in there. So the hyponym allows you to go through, here's a test patient, here is everything that we would say. We just free text, a few of us at Moffitt, and they're doing this in the military some, and we recently won a hackathon on this. We're searching for natural language processing ways of doing this and storing the hyponym banks. But after you free texted an entire, the way we used to do when we didn't have dictation templates back with tapes and all this kind of stuff, we would just free text and go through it, not look at our report. Then you say apply findings, and it takes everything from the findings mode, provided you've said it the right way, and will populate the proper areas based on how you've mapped them. I see a couple head nods. Have you seen this before? Or did you see it in an ambient mode of the new version, or did you just see it through hyponym? Because
Heard about it.
okay,
I-
It-
I mean,
Yeah, so
yeah,
if you are in the emergency department, Joe has actually linked all the hyponyms for the system templates into this, so you can actually use this today if you're using ED templates.
and he has, if you could connect us on email, because he's got some clever ways of even getting further into the daughters of the hyponyms. So it's pretty cool. Just look into it, be careful with it, because just like anything else new, you've got to learn it. You got to understand where it's working. If a field doesn't populate the right way, you still got to proofread your whole report, is what I'm saying. Because it might be that the hyponym did not replace text that you had in there already. So I see a lot of discussion on this. This is always good. I like the excitement. And did you have something you wanted to mention? I'm not picking on you. I like the dialogue, but anything to add? Okay. No, because in fact, that's how I met Seth. He was talking in the back like this. I said, "What, Seth? What?" He said, "We're doing this now." I said, "Great. Why didn't you say something?" It was with the other stuff. This is eye tracking to show without using the hyponym. This red stuff down here is we believe that was from glasses from one of the readers. But a lot of time spent on the report. I know I do this when I'm not using hyponyms. I use it for 90% of what I do. I don't do it on the CT cystograms. I elected to not do them on one thing, so I could always have a comparison. So when I get a CT cystogram, I'm like, oh, shoot, I have to do it the old fashioned way. But they're usually so straightforward. It's just plumbing, right? So it's not like the metastatic cancer. And here is with hyponym reporting. Now you can't see it because of the stop share thing, but it says hyponym reporting behind that. But more time with eyes on the images. So that's where I think that's going to be handy. PowerScribe 1 is going to have this in ambient mode. It's one of the biggest things they're claiming. The other thing is the head-up display, which is a window that you can move around type of thing. Now let me see. Oh, and it won the Audience Choice Award. So this was Sim 22. That's Cirillo Araujo. And that's who I want to hook up Joe with to connect them to talk about some of the more complicated things. So the hackathon is open to everybody. I'm co-chair of the committee, so I'm kind of giving it a plug, but the registration is free. This is one that we won back in 2019. And that's when it was actual trophies. Now you get a digital badge. But this was good for them, these young kids going in, and I was just the mentor saying we need a gamification of finding the right annotations. And so I wanted to mention ergonomics too, since I've got a couple minutes. Should we be done at 55? Okay, so I've got 30. Okay. Oh, you don't want to give me 5 minutes. But ergonomics is a big deal to me. One of my other specialties in my past life was occupational medicine. So I oversaw entire Air Force bases, and ergonomics was part of that. And NIH, in the government, in the military, the reason why we're so very thorough with ergonomics is the VA hospitals are big enough as they are. If we took everybody and they weren't doing things right at their desk on a regular basis, our VA hospitals would probably double in size. I mean, I know I'm hurting over the years of doing 40 years of radiology as an X-ray tech too, and some other things and damage I did to myself with ski patrol. But ski patrol is supposed to be helping the skiers, right? Not hurting yourselves, but we had to train. But there are rules about this, and we're very interested at Moffitt, mostly because we don't have an ergonomist. I mean, at NIH, for example, US government, Helen would come down with her orange yardstick, and she looked like she was going to either hit you with it or you'd be paying a visit and we need to give you an occupational medicine consult, because it's not just about your back being straight. It's about not having your hands up here without monitor risers, right? Our boss's monitor risers were on the floor, and I said, Bob, those should be on your monitors. They need to be a certain height, 20 centimeters. And this is all worked out too. Like you've got the blue light in the reading room. That's 3000 Kelvin. You want a certain amount of lux. Mammography, whole nother game there. And I don't know anyone in mammography who's quite doing it right, because you can find something, but even when you stand, the monitors have to be a certain right. You have 5 points of contact. There's a lot going on with that. Anyway, I'm done here. I'll just, are there any more questions? Were there any more questions in the chat? I see things here. Should I click on them? Yeah. I'm the annotation guy talking about clicking, asking you. I don't know how to, should I just take it from the top?
Yeah.
Oh, to record your attendance? No.
That's like
Do you volumetric for tumor measurement? Oh, for the potential of the volumetric? I think the potential is great. This is a myth. It's just that it was only about 75%. If it's not 90%, I'm not going to do it. I don't think a lot of people will do it. We did the volumetrics when we had an extra person. Let me see if I'm answering it. Do you do volumetric for tumor? No, so we're not. There are studies, there's research studies where we're doing glioblastoma, for example. There's somebody here doing glioblastoma. I can't remember the name, but I have their name. I'll get that to you. You know who these are.
And then Joe asked, how are you getting text to filter specifically into the impression field?
Good question. I went in the hyponym. Since we don't have Rad AI yet, I'm pushing for it. I understand PowerScribe 1 will have some form of that too. I just do it manually every time. Oh, so in the hyponym, when you're doing that, let me just go to the slide. Where's the PowerPoint show thing? Down here. What I do and what is generally done is you see the word impression down here. Everything below that word impression is my impression. So every time I find a finding that I know is going to be impressionable, it's impressionable on me, I put it below in the impression. That's just my way of making sure it's going to get in the impression. So I don't know of a way of automatically doing that yet. Maybe if Joe does.
No, I think that's the way I was doing it as well.
But Rad AI, and I don't have any financial interest in them. I just have an interest in getting something that puts our impressions there automatically. I've tested in a sandbox some of these programs, and they work pretty well. In fact, one time a resident put an impression in something in the impression. I said, "Oh, impression can be directly input through the findings." It can. Okay, yeah. Oh, this is our
Joe.
That's
So
our
he was
Joe.
saying that
Okay.
he wasn't aware that the impression could
Oh, okay.
directly input
Wow,
it.
I taught him something. Great.
Yeah.
Hi, Joe. Yeah, so it just put in the word impression and then in the hyponym part of that impression. And I'll connect you with Cirillo too. He's our mastermind on this. And also Nathan with the US Air Force at Walter Reed, or now he's at Andrews Air Force Base. And there's about 10 different countries interested in following this too. Yeah, just put the word impression there. And I have it where it auto numbers. So I think it's with start numbering. And the numbers will just fall into place. In fact, when I have a resident prelim from overnight, they're not dictating. Actually, they dictate one thing, but they're in another hospital. It's really convoluted. But you get this prelim free text, and I can take the resident prelim text, put it in there. I read it. I get the idea of what they said. First, I get my own impression of what the images say to me. I get my own impression of what's going on. Then I read what the resident said. Then I apply findings, and then the resident text will all magically just fill in for the most part, and they're not even trying to fit it, so it's fitting into hyponym.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you guys coming. This right here is from the informatics team. I don't know if Sophie's still here or not, but yeah, so we call ourselves Pi Cubed. So this is just a little gift from our team for coming and joining us this week.
Thank you.
If you guys have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. I can connect you with Dr. Folio if you want to be connected to him. There were a couple of things mentioned around the hyponyms, the hyperlinking, and the mouse. Just so you guys know, PyCube did select a new mouse for us to distribute across reading rooms that is more ergonomic. And so we'll be seeing that come out over the next couple of weeks as we get the setup for that completed. So thank you all.